And just so everyone knows, I am going to turn on record to my computer so I can record it to a podcast so that you can either see this lecture later visually, or if you just want to listen to it for other purposes and for students who couldn't join us tonight. So that's the other aspect. I just wanted to bring that up because it's something new that I'm doing in order to make it more efficient for us to have recorded lectures for those who want to go back, or for students who just weren't able to make it tonight. Okay, so I just want to talk tonight about some of the different terminology so that when we come back to class on next Tuesday, we can really get into some of the topics that we're really interested in when it comes to sociology, such as poverty, nation states, government systems, influences on groups and individuals. So I just want to go over tonight, for tonight's purposes, I just want to go over some of the terminology so that we're all on the same page, so we know what sociologists and social psychologists are defining these different terms as. We've used in this class the term power a lot. And I think on both a cognitive level and an emotional level, we all understand what the term power means. It's when something is contingent on another thing, okay? So for example, tonight, we can say that without the battery power in our phones or within our laptops, and if the power went out, we no longer have the ability to take part in this class. Our power was taken away. All right, so who has authority over that power that makes us so we can attend this class? Well, our power companies have authority. Our local governments have authority. We have authority on the ability to pay for the services we get to get the electrical power to our laptops or to our phones and those kinds of things. And when we think about power on the human level, I want you to keep this analogy in mind, because power, according to sociologists and psychologists, is a position of authority. We don't have electricity unless the power company provides it. That's authority. The next variable is influence. We are supposed to, in any community, have the choice of the power company that we want to receive power from. But because of the communities that we're in, the people who own the power lines, the people who are sourcing that power, we only have very limited choice. And so we can't say, I'm thinking of myself here in Tucson, I have the ability to buy electricity from any other utility in the state of Arizona. That's my right. But unless I want to pay an exorbitant price for them to run electricity through lines that are owned by another person, my only option really in my position is to buy power through the Tucson Electrical Authorities. I can't remember the name, but that's really my only choice, unless I had the financial means and I had the abilities for other electrical utilities to purchase the lines to deliver the power to my home. I think the Tohono Nation is in that same position, that really when it comes to electricity, there's only one option. And that provides authority and it provides influence over people's choices to choose the power that they're getting. And certain skills one has over others. And this, again, I'm using the analogy of electricity. The skills to build the power lines where you want, to own the property where power lines are built, to own the connections that go into certain places. All of those are given by the person who has the skills to purchase those lands, to build those structures, and to put those in place. So when we talk about power, we're talking about these very specific domains. The person who has real authority and influence and certain skills to give direction over other people, even if those people are supposed to have other options than what is being provided for them. Okay? And within sociology, anthropology, and psychology, we all agree that there are 5 sources of power. There is what we call legitimate power or positional power. Legitimate power is when we go to the election pools in a democracy or sometimes in a republic, and we say the person with the most votes retains the power to make decisions over the rest of us. That's democracy. Legitimate power is when a corporate executive officer is hired by a board and they're told that they have the power to make decisions for a corporation. It's called legitimate and positional power because it's provided by their position and by the legal agreement that we have with everyone. Okay? So that's the first source of power. Expert power is given to those individuals who are seen to have a knowledge that the rest of us do not have. And so we allow them to control our behaviors, our mental processes, and our emotions. Okay? So what are some examples of expert power? They're not, and this is something that is very confusing in our system here in the United States. The President of the United States does not have expert power. Your state legislatures, the persons who's voted to be the chairperson of your Native American nation, the people who are voted to be on your educational boards, they do not have expert power. They have legitimate power because people have voted them in. People who have expert power are people that we give power to because we see them as knowledgeable in a domain. So who are people who have expert power? It can be people like Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, but within certain communities, it can be the Pope of the Catholic religion. It can be the pastor on a Sunday's lecture or sermon. It can be your teacher, okay, in an educational system. We all feel that for some reason, because of those people's experiences in life, that they have power to make decisions over us because of certain life experiences that they have that we feel we don't have. That is truly what expert power is it's a perception thing. Public officials, yes, Angel, and medicine mans, yes, those are perfect examples of expert power. And expert power is something that the individual gives them, not necessarily anything special about them. And that's an important thing to state. Okay. And it was, and I think this is a perfect example that Angel brought up. In some cultural contexts, a medicine person who might be able to have visions that other people don't have, or might be considered an elder within the community, just because of their age or whatever, may have certain experiences that the people of that community don't have. And so they provide that person with expert power. And they follow those directions just because the community feels, the culture feels that that person has that expert power. And I think, Angel, that's a perfect example. Now, I'm going to state this. These powers are neither evil nor are they benign. It is all dependent upon the culture that grants those authorities with power. And I'm going to speak here on my experience on the Tanaafan community. I work with a lot of elders that provide me with a lot of knowledge that I can relay to the students I work with. But not all students on the Tanaafan Nation necessarily agree with that elder or that medicine person because of where they live on the Tanaafan Nation, because of the dialect they speak, because of their understanding of traditional stories. So this is an important point to make, and I'm glad that it was brought up. Expert power is provided to individuals based on a person's cultural, knowledgeable, and familiar understanding of what an expert is. And if that expert guides us to a meaningful life, yay, that's awesome. But we also have to understand that expert power can also have devastating effects, as we saw in, for example, World War II, and in one of probably the best examples was in a jungle in Guyana, where a pastor convinced most of his leaders, 900 of his followers, to take a juice that killed them. So the understanding of expert power, we need to understand, is very community-based and very culturally based. The thing that we want to know as sociologists, as psychologists, and anthropologists is how are those experts using their power over that community that they're exerting it on? And is that power going to lead to something that is going to be detrimental to that community or build that community? Okay. The third power, the third power is cohesive power. This is power that is forced upon people because of an authority figure. And I'm going to bring up some national examples for this one. We can use the example of North Korea, We can use the example of the government of Russia right now, even though that they claim to be communist, it's becoming more of a dictatorship. We can look at the countries of Iran who say that they have expert power because of their religion, but they're actually using cohesive means to get people to submit to their authority. And I'm going to bring this on more of the meso micro level here in the United States. A police officer, because they hold a gun and the badge, have the right to seize you based on what they perceive, and they have the right to shoot you if you do not comply to their orders. These are all forms of cohesive power. And we've seen this in the last week with another police shooting. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all police officers are bad or not. I'm just saying that that can be used as a form of power, not as a form of keeping the law, not as a form of keeping civility within a community, but when given that ability to be abusive over other people because you have a badge and a gun, that is what is known as cohesive power. And again, later in the course, we'll talk about community policing versus military policing. And what we will see as our local law enforcement militarize themselves to become more of a cohesive power, it actually creates more dysfunction within our communities. Homicide, suicide, and mental health rates all go exponentially when our police officers walk around with their guns and their military garb and drive around in military grade vehicles. That doesn't decrease crime, it increases it. And it increases dysfunction within communities. And so we'll talk about this cohesive power, but we also have to talk about it in the reflection of authority figures, or who we give authority to. We'll talk about something called the infamous Milgram studies, where a person who anyone doesn't know, but because they're wearing a lab coat and are thought to be the experts going to number 2, more than 2/3 of people are willing to electrocute a person to the moment of death, high risk, XXX. And dependent upon how that person uses their authority, we can get anyone from 10% of people up to 90% of people to shock someone to the moment of high risk death. So we'll come back and look at this thing that we give expertise and cohesive power to when it comes to authority. We also have to look at the issue of referent power. Referent power is given to someone because of their position. All right? And this is a little bit different than legitimate power. Legitimate power is when people put someone in a position because everyone agrees they should be there. Expert power is because of the title that we're provided to those individuals. Cohesive power is the power we give to someone because we feel a threat by them. So if we don't obey them, we feel something negative will happen to them. Referent power is given to individuals because of the social position a society gives to them. So in the 1980s and in the 2016s, we elected people because of their referent power. Both of them were TV stars. They were part of the popular media. and popular culture. We gave them referent power because they were successful financially, even though they weren't. We gave them referent power because of their abilities. So we made them presidents of the United States. Referent power is when we are willing to listen to someone like, oh gosh, I'm getting old, so I got to think of some modern people here. Referent power is when we give the opinion of Miley Cyrus over the opinion of I'm thinking of an expert here, so give me just a minute. The opinion of the person who is the number one expert in physiology or in medical field. We're more willing to listen to the Tom Hanks than we're willing to listen to the doctors who come on and actually have the knowledge and the ability to say this is what's healthy and what's not healthy for us. That is what we refer to, sorry, my voice, when we talk about referent power. When we give power to people who are celebrities, who were trained to act, not to be experts. When we go on social media and we find the person who has 15,000 followers because they're half naked on their social media, but we're going to give them decision power over what we are deciding. So if they disagree with someone who is an expert or someone who has knowledge or education in that area, because they have 15,000 followers, we're going to follow them. Okay? Reward power is when we give power to people because we feel that they are special. Okay, and so I'm going to fully admit this, and I'm not going to deny this power I give these individuals because it's very, very important in my life. So when I talk about my educational experience, I always bring up the fact that I am first generational high school. I'm first generational college. And I am the only one in my family history who has achieved a doctorate degree. But when my mom or my grandma says, Curtis, this is how you need to treat other people, I give them that power, even if it is counter to what I know about social psychology, anthropology, sociology. If my grandma or my mom came and said, Curtis, knock that shit off. This is how you need to treat people. That is what we call reward power. These are individuals that we give power to not because they've achieved anything in this world. Okay, my grandma, mom, they gave birth to me, they raised me, I'm still alive. I feel that's an achievement. But they have never studied decision making. They've never studied the science of how we should treat in groups versus out groups. They've never studied child development and how development occurs. And even when they call me and say, you should have treated your child like this, even when I know from the science that I know, I'm not going to tell them, oh, mom, grandma, you're wrong. I'm going to say, oh, thank you for the advice. And when you're around, I'm going to heed that advice. That's what we call reward power. Reward power isn't given to people with any type of studied knowledge or anything else. It's who we give authority to, again, because of our culture, because of the way we're upbringing, because the fact is, I'm not going to lose my mom and grandma because I have a different opinion based on quote unquote science or facts. Okay, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. So I give them that power and that ability to say, you probably should listen to this. Angel, yes, you're exactly right on that. The reward power is a humble way of saying, I'm giving you this power because of my respect, my opinion of you. Perfect example. Everyone, I'd like you to listen. I'd like you to read that quote that Angel put, that question Angel put in the chat. And she stated that, is reward power just a humble way of acknowledgement? And the answer to that is absolutely, Angel. You completely understand the idea behind reward power. Okay, so these are the 5 major sources of power that we provide other people. And in some cases, we provide ourselves. All right? And so I'm going to think of, I was a student once. I work with a lot of college professors and university professors. And there are times when a student challenges, I'm going to put a quote unquote us, and we sit there and some of us put our ego aside and go, well, maybe the student is right. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. I've dealt with a lot of instructors and professors who have thought, who is this student? I have the legitimate power. I was hired by the university. I'm the expert. I have the master's and the doctorate degree. I have cohesive power because the classroom is my classroom. I have the referent power, and I should have the reward power. And so even sometimes when professors and instructors are completely wrong, and I have to admit, I have had to check myself on this, that sometimes even when the power is completely wrong, they won't acknowledge it when they are wrong. And that's the thing that we need to understand in the system of sociology, psychology, and even anthropology, is once that power is given, fact and fiction, fake news, real news, liberal, conservative, no longer matter. No longer matter. Because once that power is given to someone, it is there. And I can bring up one of the most powerful examples of this, and that's religion. Okay? Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, all of them have good points of living, good points of how we should be good people. But when those opinions counteract with each other, people will instantly give the power to those who they feel are legitimate, expert, cohesive, referent, and reward, without questioning anything. Okay? So I just want to bring that out because, Angel, your question. So Angel also asked, where would charisma be as a power be under? Okay, so Angel, that's an excellent question, because someone who is charismatic, so this is a personality, function will claim any 5 of these powers in order to gain authority over the people that they want to subject. So when we get to the section on personality and how individuals influence groups, we will talk about the issue of charisma and individual psychology, because there are people in our world that have no source of any of these powers, but because of the power of their language, because of the power that they can influence others, they don't have to have, and I'm just going to bring this, they don't have to be an elected official. They don't have to have an education or degree. They don't have to have an army. They don't have to have a position of popularity. They don't have to have won any reward. And what Angel is bringing up is an important point. A charismatic person, if they can give the false persuasion that they have any of these power, they can have power over anyone. And again, I'll bring up the example of World War II, okay? When we look at Adolf Hitler, he did not, when he went into his position of authority, he did not have expert power. He did not have reward power. He neither had referent power. 2 sources of power he did have is he won an election that gave him legitimate power, but that legitimate power only gave him the ability to change the definition of his position, which gave him cohesive power over others. Okay? And so when we look at certain individuals, what we need to understand is just the way they talk to us and the way they're able to influence us, we give them power. I will bring up, for example, rock concerts. Okay. Has anybody ever watched, what is it? I'm trying to think of the name of the famous where everyone was together. Queen. Yes, thank you, Angel. Queen concert. Okay. Yes, you had a person go on stage that had amazing talent. Okay. But when you watch those concerts, everyone becomes obsessed with that person, and they all become as almost one biological body towards that individual. Now, in Queen's case, I kind of agree with a lot of what Queen said, but it's a very good example. But we could bring up heavy metal concerts. We can bring up concerts where people get assaulted. We can bring up the second, oh shoot, I can't remember the name of it. Anyways, there was a concert that was repeated that the whole almost population lit the entire thing on fire. So we can see how a single individual, just because of their charisma, can influence entire groups. Okay. And we'll talk more about that as we move along. Woodstock. Yes, thank you. Woodstock is the name, is what I was looking for. Okay. Now, let's talk about some different other definitions that we should talk about. One is power differential, and that's the unequal distribution about material phenomenon, okay? And so I'm going to speak very specifically about, for an example, a power differential here in the United States. A lot of people give power to the Elon Musks, the owner of Amazon, the owner of Microsoft, because they have amassed this amazing amount of wealth. And we think because of the wealth they amassed, there must be something different about them than us. And so, for example, when Elon Musk goes on and he says something, the majority of people say Elon Musk is right. Even if it's a moral issue, if it's a family issue, if it's a community issue, just because of his financial wealth, people provide him with a power because we see the unequal distribution of that between what he has an example and what we have as an example. So that's what we call power differentials, is that an Elon Musk of the world could be just like us. But because of the advantages that was afforded to him, he was able to amass wealth. And so we artificially provide him with a special place of power. Okay. And so the question about the power to the entrepreneur, yes, that is correct. But the thing that we don't understand is greater than 95% of entrepreneurs fail in the United States. Fail. 5 in 7 new companies that are started every year will fail within the first 5 years. But the people we pay attention to is that percentage that had the advantage, the ability, the resources to make it so their failed beginnings became successful. And so there is this glorification of entrepreneurs because we think that they are the successful people in our country. Yet if we look at it from a statistical perspective, if you want to become an entrepreneur, you're going to fail at a higher rate than if you go into any of the other professions. And that's something that we don't recognize in the United States because we only give power to those individuals who actually make it, but we don't recognize that greater than 95% of entrepreneurs become poor, end up bankrupt, and end up working for McDonald's. And I'm just being honest in this dialect that we're having. But because we see this power differential between those very few who actually make it, we ignore the mass number of individuals who don't. And so we encourage individuals to become entrepreneurs, to become business owners, to become this, even though that we know statistically 4 out of 5 of them are going to fail. And they're going to end up back in the service industries. And I think that's a sad realization that we need to come to here in the United States. Dialectical materialism, ongoing debate about material phenomenon. This is a terminology that we need to talk about because there's a difference between true material and created material. And this is something that we're going to talk about when we come to the economic systems that we actually live in. Does the United States actually have the ability to back your income that they provide to you The answer is no. At one point in our country, in order to print money, you had to have gold, silver, or something to back that money. But today, materialism is based on a promise where we print money no matter what, and we have no backing for it, but you're trusting that the government will come and support that if that dollar or if that money doesn't come to credit. Okay. And so the idea of dialectical materialism is this debate between, do common people really understand materialism, which is the production of what we have, versus what a power entity says you can have because you need to trust me? All right. And again, the issue of the increasing national debt was mentioned. The truth is, our national debt increases because no matter how much money we print, we can't cover the cost of that national debt because we say we can cover it, but we can't. Okay. And someday, every nation that is on a credit-based system is going to have to come to realize our government doesn't have $2-something trillion in gold bullion and silver and all of that. So the dialect about materialism is going to be an important debate that we need to have. Natural power and needs, the capability and needs that humans share with other animals. And I think this is an important conversation we should have, especially within the context. And I'm going to bring in the second one, species, powers, and needs, which is a capability and needs that is specific to a species. For humans, a very specific need we have is social connection. We have to have each other. We have, both on a neural basis and a human basis and a survival basis, we are a social being. With each other, without each other, we fail to survive. Okay. But the issue of natural power and needs versus species powers and needs is that one species' needs will always try and supersede the needs of another species. Okay, which leads to human beings overfishing, over mining, over resource allocation, destroying bios at a mass rate at the sacrifice of other species, because those species, they don't matter to us and they don't have the power to overturn the decisions we make as a species. So when we talk about natural and species power, we need to understand that as a species, we're always trying to, as this next one says, species being, the state of being fully maximized with all natural species powers and needs met. This is the antithesis to these first two, is that humans on some level feel like we're supposed to protect the earth. So we have national parks, we have endangered species acts, we have all of those things in act. But when other parts of our species feel like their resources are being threatened, that their resources are being taken, those species-specific things like animal rights, like animal protections, like designations of national parks don't matter. And again, I'll bring this up in the last presidency with Donald Trump when everyone felt that our natural resources were being depleted. So he opened up all of the lands of the national park systems to be exploited for oil and minerals and all of those things. We see this in the pipeline that would go from Canada to the Gulf Coast, which would have never benefited to the United States, but we thought it would. The pipeline that went through native lands and all of those that were accelerated during the Trump era would have never benefited the United States. Never. But because of the financial exploitation of that, because of the ability to do that, that would have that's what was the benefit, and species powers and natural power overtook during that time period that ability. The other one that we use in sociology is distortion. And we specifically say this is the consequences of capitalism. Capitalism in being the whole idea of trickle-down theory, the whole idea that competition is the way to end homelessness and to end poverty and all of those cases. Okay. The issue is, unless you have fair capitalism, where when people enter that system, everyone has the fair ability to compete in that system, capitalism fails. Capitalism has shown to fail. It failed the Greeks. It failed it failed the Greeks. Oh my goodness, I can't remember. I'm sorry, you guys. Anyways, it's failed every great society who has tried to build a pure capitalist system, because what it creates is those who have and those who don't have. In the early days of capitalism in here in the United States, and this is where a lot of the myth of capitalism comes up. In the early days of capitalism here in the United States, it did decrease homelessness and poverty and those kinds of things. But that's because in the beginning days of capitalism, everyone was on the same page. Everyone had this almost, except for those quote unquote great people that we put on pedestals who then took advantage of the capitalist system. Everyone had the same playing field for a good part. I'm going to exclude groups here in the United States that we know well, Native American communities, Black communities, Latino community. They were never put at that equal status to realize capitalism, okay? So it was much more difficult for those groups to realize that. But in the beginning days of capitalism in the United States, if you were a white European American, because everybody started at more or less an equal point, there was a reduction in poverty and homelessness and all those things. But what we have seen since then, with the power differentials within capitalism, it's increasing poverty, homelessness, even within that group that started off with an equal status within the capitalist system. Okay, so that's something that we need to recognize, this idea of distortion, that one system trumps another system. Capitalism trumps socialism. Socialism trumps communism. Communism trumps dictatorship. All of these distortions create this image of that we have to get towards a certain point and everyone will be okay. But what these systems have actually shown is all of them have problems. I mentioned socialism and I mentioned communism when we went through theories, and we saw the issues of power within those. And so them as a pure system doesn't work. And we're finding that capitalism, now that we've tried it out for 100 or 200 years, isn't the best system of economics, but we have this distortion that it is. So as sociologists and psychologists and anthropologists, we need to figure out what is the balance, what would create the consequences for all individuals to have the ability to survive and live. Some other different terms, and we'll end with this slide here. I think I've gone off on a tangent. Alienation is a form of, that should say of, not odd, distortion caused by capitalism, resulting in human species being separated from their species being. What alienation is creating this illusion that rich people and poor people are of a different kind. That poor people, there is mentally something deficit with them, that there's issues with them. They'll never be of the best kind. And so the people who should be responsible and spend the resources of a nation or a community should be those who have. Okay? And then we have this issue of false consciousness. And I'll read this. It's a failure to recognize one's place in the social hierarchy because one is allowed to believe that they are in control of one's choices. I am going to bring up in this context professional athletes. Okay, if we look at football, if we look at baseball and stuff, it's largely made up of individuals of a minority status, Black, Hispanic, Mexican, whatever it may be. Only a few of professional athletes are the white archetype of what an athlete should be. But what we find is with these athletes who are in a minority situation, they actually have just as much prejudices and discrimination towards their own people as their white archetype individuals. If we look at, when we look at, for example, Black prejudice and Black hate crimes, a rich, wealthy Black person is just as likely to commit a hate crime towards a less advantaged Black person as a white person is. Yet, once their privilege as an athlete is taken away, they're not seen much different than those other people that they've been comparing themselves to. And this is what we call false consciousness. Okay? Social class is a place one occupies within a given social hierarchy. And there are three general classes, and we've talked about these before when we talked about conflict theory. There's a very wealthy upper class, those who have. There's the middle class, small business, those who produce. And there's the lower class who rely on low-paying wages and jobs, who provide. Okay, that's a little different than what we learned from conflict theory. Because the thing that we need to recognize is that the lower class is the class that we rely on to provide for everyday services. Okay, and we can break this down statistically. I'm going to bring up my pen. I haven't done this yet tonight. The middle class relies on at least 7 people in the lower class to maintain their livelihood and the way that they live. The very wealthy class rely on 7 middle class people and rely on 15 lower class people to maintain their standard of living, not work-wise, not owning a company or anything else, just their personal means of living. What provides them with a clean home, a maintenanced home, their taxes and financials done correctly, they're feeding their families. Okay, so if you look at a societal and class system, this is why we have such a large lower class, and then the middle class is somewhere in between, and we have a very wealthy and powerful upper class, because each one maintains their class position by how many individuals in those other classes that they need to rely on to maintain their standard of living. And if you wonder why trickle-down economics doesn't work, because as a very wealthy person, if you're relying on 20 plus people just to maintain your personal lifestyle, not your business, not your job title, just you, do you want to pay them a living wage? Because guess what? That's going to cut into your power and wealth. And guess what? That might make them into the middle class. And so then who's going to be the lower class for me that meets my needs as someone in a very wealthy, powerful upper class? So if we want to wonder why here in the United States the federal minimum wage is $7.25, if we want to wonder why teachers are paid the way they are, people who come to our homes and make them livable through cleaning and all of those things, the people at the restaurants who service our meals and stuff like that, guess what? It's power. It's because once you give them more power and resources, guess what? You lose them, and therefore, in this model, you will lose your class standing, because you might have to cook for yourself. You might have to clean your house. You might have to clean your own car. Ew, according to this class. You might have to do your own freaking taxes. Okay, so when we look at these class systems, we have to look at what is the power that maintains them, and what is the psychology of those individuals that want to maintain the system. And so they're going to influence the middle and lower class, saying, hey, you guys don't want to be where we're at. You guys need to work a lot harder. You need to clean my car better. You need to make food better. You need to be better at tax returns so you get a better rate at what you're doing, because that's the only way that you are going to be. And guess what? They make that next step not accomplishable for that other class within that system. And that's how social classes work. We're going to finish up with these 2 terms because I know we're getting late. We only have 5 minutes left in the class time. And so I'm going to bring fetishism of commodities. Loves for things that money can buy eventually lead to love for money itself. And it's a very vicious cycle. That's what credit card companies, that's what all of these debt companies rely on, is that if you have more buying power, that will make it so that you have much more of a need to earn money. And so that will bring about commodity. Okay, that's fetishism for commodities, when we value what buying power we have versus the value of what we bring to the world and what we can realize with the world. Because believe it or not, there are so many people in this world that deserve the wealth of the world, but they don't give it because they can't sell themselves as a commodity. They're not a resource that can be consumed. And I just want everyone to think about that. Class consciousness is a realization one's class is an exploited class. And this is something that sociology, psychologists, and anthropologists want us to recognize. That our class that we're in is constantly being exploited. And how do we end that? How do we stop the idea that wealthy people are looking out for us and taking care of us because we're providing a service? That's a false reality. That's fetishism of commodities. And how do the wealthy individuals realize their power because of their exploitation? So we got to flip the coin too. Okay, I'm not saying we need to feel sorry for people who have all of their needs met. But what I'm saying is how do we flip their consciousness to realize the value of all human beings and the resources we have here on earth, and that these resources should be shared, not exploited. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing right now because we've gone over all of these other terminologies so that we can move on with the